Was this suspension worthy? Austin Cindric was fined $50,000 and docked 50 driver's points for this incident with Ty Dillon during the race at Circuit of the Americas on lap 4, where Cindric intentionally hooked Ty Dillon on the front stretch in frustration due to an incident a few laps prior, ultimately resulting in the fines I just shared. Now, this ruling has some people scratching their heads due to a few reasons. So one, when you hear the phrase intentional wreck or intentional right rear hook, I don't know about you guys, but I think about the word suspension, and apparently, according to Mike Ford, suspension was on the table for Austin Cindric. In NASCAR's newest podcast, Holler Talk, they talked all about this. However, though, they ultimately decided on a points and monetary fine. One, because we're at a road course, the speeds are generally much slower and the track is more confined. And two, because the move did not result in a caution flag. So that's their decision, and ultimately they understand that it is not going to be a popular one. However, they said, quote, "We felt that if we suspended him, the punishment wouldn't have fit the crime. It was probably going to be too severe of a punishment. We felt the right thing to do was to hit his wallet and hit his points wallet." They continued to justify the decision on Holler Talk by bringing up the Wallace and Elliott suspensions that happened at mile and a half, saying that they didn't view this incident with Austin Cindric the same as those where drivers were right rear hooking somebody else at 180 miles per hour. But they did compare it to the Hocevar and Burton incident last year, where Hocevar hooked Burton under caution last year. So there's multiple arguments to be made there with what they're comparing this incident to and what they're doing to justify their decision. But some might say it doesn't matter what track it happens at, an intentional right rear hook to somebody should result in a suspension because it's deemed as an action detrimental to stock car racing. But again, there can be things ruled back and forth here. The other piece that was brought up in this conversation is NASCAR's new waiver rule, and if Cindric was suspended, this would be the first true test of that policy. Some saying that the act of not suspending him alone was a test of the policy, which I don't agree with whatsoever, because the policy, the new waiver policy, doesn't determine if a driver is suspended. It determines what happens if they're suspended, and if they're granted a waiver, what happens at that point. Which, by the way, if a competition official does grant a waiver for playoff eligibility, bearing in mind medical exceptions, that driver will forfeit all playoff points accumulated in the regular season, and that driver would start the playoffs with a maximum of 2,000 points. Obviously, that's not going to come into play here, but anyways, my thoughts. I don't really think this ruling was super consistent. It happened under a green flag condition, and the right rear hook is an action that's detrimental to stock car racing. So I'm personally not a fan of the call, but if anything, I guess you can likely compare it to Austin Dillon's Richmond incident and how things were ruled there, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments below.